2016 has been an historic year for electing women to public office. Taiwan, the Marshall Islands, and the United Kingdom have all elected women to their highest offices, and in the United States, a woman is the presidential nominee for a major party for the first time in the nation's history. But women still lag far behind men when it comes to running for and being elected to leadership positions. The Women in Public Service Project convened an expert panel to explore why the gender gap exists and what it will take to capitalize on recent progress. Their discussion provides the focus for this edition of Rewind.
I'd like to welcome you to this panel on how we get women elected. This is going to be a conversational panel because we've got a panel deep in experience globally of electing women candidates and candidates generally. And I think in this election year in the U.S., the big question is, are we ready?
How many of you have thought of running for office? Raise your hand. Okay. It's notable, I would say, though.
Better than I expected.
Better than we expected, but probably still less than a quarter in the room. And that's here in the United States, where we would say our opportunities are probably, well, they are a lot easier than a lot of the young people will face overseas. When we look at campaigns, and especially when we're talking about this issue of getting more women elected, if we're waiting to start until the electoral season in a country, we've waited too long. If you ask a lot of young people, are you interested in running for office? Are you interested in a political career? Most of them will actually say no, and that's true overseas as well. So what we need to do is sort of reframe this conversation. Do people really understand what it means to be in public office? Oftentimes, due to the rancor of our political parties and our systems here in the United States as well as abroad, politics becomes a very dirty word. It's contentious, it's very bipartisan, no one gets along, there's no consensus.
If you go to high school, 2/3 of all students aren't interested in leadership or politics, fine. But of the third that are, it's 50-50, boys and girls. By the time you all graduate from college, it's like 80% of all students say, nah, we're not doing politics, of which 98% of them are women. So your 20% is virtually all male, and they are all ready to run the next day. They graduate day one, and they're ready to run the next day. So we are interested in looking at what happens. Why is it that all those young women with leadership potential and who've been doing leadership things, whether it's, captaining your team or being on the student council or being a counselor, whatever it is that they were doing at high school, by the time they graduate from college, all that leadership, which is what it's about, it's leadership, that leadership ambition, that leadership drive has gone. In the United States, we know it takes a woman to be asked 7 times, before she'll stand for any kind of office. And she won't even acknowledge that she's been in a leadership position most of the time before that.
I think there's no mistake that one of the best female political leaders of our time, Nancy Pelosi, she grew up in a time when her father was a leg-breaking mayor of Baltimore, and so she saw that political firsthand growing up, was immersed in it, and maybe not a female role model, but she saw what it looked like. You look at some other exceptional female leaders, Indira Gandhi, Benazir Bhutto, they grew up in political families and saw this firsthand. So I think some people are maybe dismissive of that and say they got to where they were because of their family. That may be part of it, but I think it's more because it's so hard for women to see themselves in these roles that when you're part of a family and you can see it firsthand, it helps and you can imagine yourself in those places.
Do you understand the wealth you have in these two organizations? Oftentimes, those women's organizations are well mobilized, they're well connected, but they're not well funded. They're sort of set aside until the elections come along and the party suddenly needs 30% of the list to be names of women. And so we actually do a lot of work with capacity building for both youth as well as women's organizations. We want them to play a really integral part in that party, not just at the election season, but throughout the cycle. Because once we can get the political parties to really understand the advantage and the role they play, it's a better entree for both women and youth in the elections.
When the average Georgian woke up in the morning, he or she thought, yeah, women, men, 50-50 leadership, it's fine. But by the time they'd gone to sleep, almost, it was like, oh, no, we're not having women in positions. And what had happened between waking and sleeping? It's that sociocultural piece, how women were portrayed in the media, how women were talked about. They didn't see women on public platforms dealing with the hard issues. So in a way, the environment affected them every day. And so when our team looked at it, they said, this is not then about campaign schools for women leadership. It's not about working with political parties. It's about changing the perception of women in the broad society.
When we did work in Yemen, one thing that really surprised us, and this is in 2012, we asked people, do you believe there should be Sharia law in Yemen? And an overwhelming majority of people said yes. It was 80% of something. And then, later on, we asked, do you think, after this national dialogue and we build a new government, should there be quotas for women? 80% said yes, there should be quotas to have more women political participation, including majorities of men. That really surprised me that those two views could be consistent with one another.
We raise our young girls to be accommodating and accepting, and to expect everybody to like them. And we almost raise our young boys to accept that not everybody will like them. And actually it's a very good thing, because you've got to be competitive and you've got to be tough and you've got to have a hard skin to make it. So this business about the gender culture is important. If we change the gender roles, we actually transform society for everybody. We liberate both men and women from harmful gendered practices. And I think that is a stronger message that we have to start getting across.
For more on this and related topics, visit wilsoncenter.org. Click the Research tab and search under the Women in Public Service Project.